Hi, everyone, and welcome to our information session on the Affordable Housing Grant Program. The Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. In proclaiming the International Decade for People of African Descent, the United Nations and the international community recognize that people of African descent represent a distinct group whose human rights must be promoted and protected. Closed captioning is available for this session. Participants must turn on this service manually on their own desktop by pressing the CC button on the bottom right of the screen. There may be a slight delay before the captioning starts. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Affordable Housing Grant webpage. If you prefer to not participate in a recorded session, you can leave the meeting by pressing the Leave button at the top of the screen. Regardless of your participation in today's session, please reach out to members of the social policy team if you have questions or would like additional information on the grant. Contact information is available on the halifax.ca affordable housing webpage. We will answer questions posted through the chat function at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to add your question at any time. To add a question, click on the purple Ask a Question button and a text box will appear. If you would like your name to be on the public record, post your first and last name with your question. If you don't want your name on the public record, you can post anonymously or use a nickname or just your first name. The agenda for today's meeting will include introductions to the social policy team, information about this year's Affordable Housing Grant Program, including what kinds of projects can be considered, how projects are chosen, highlights of the application form, and key dates. We'll do a high-level overview of other HRM affordable housing initiatives, and we'll have time to answer any questions you may have after the presentation. I extend a warm welcome to today's session from the social policy team, which includes Jill McClelland, who is our principal planner. Brandon Umperville is a planner on the social policy team, and I'm Jamie Ellen Klenovic. I'm also a planner on the social policy team and the lead contact for the Affordable Housing Grant Program. The grant was created with funds collected through the Density Bonus Program, which is a requirement of the Land Use Bylaw for the Regional Center. The Density Bonus Program requires developers to pay cash in lieu of affordable housing for any development over 2,000 square meters of floor area in a designated zone. This money is then dispersed to nonprofit housing projects through the Affordable Housing Grant Program. The grant is controlled by an administrative order approved by Council in 2020. 2021-22 was the first year that we operated the grant, and we funded over $800,000 for 3 projects, including $160,000 to Affirmative Ventures for their new construction of 45 affordable units in their Main Street Center project in Dartmouth, $180,000 to Welcome Housing for improvements to 4 existing deeply affordable units in Halifax's North End, and $470,000 to Compass Nova Scotia for their new construction of 51 affordable units in their cooperative housing project on Maitland Street in Halifax. There are 2 sources of funding for the grant. Because the density bonus scheme is set up by the Land Use Bylaw for the Regional Center, cash collected through that program can only support affordable housing projects in the Regional Center. The map on the right of this slide shows the Regional Center. It is the Halifax Peninsula and Dartmouth inside the Circumferential Highway. There's currently no set amount of money earmarked for this year's grant. After we review the applications, we will write a staff report to Council asking them to allocate funds from the Density Bonus Reserve based on recommendations from our review. The second source of funding is the Planning and Development Operating Budget, and this money can be used to support projects anywhere in the municipality. The total amount of this for this portion of the grant is $200,000. According to the administrative order, grant funds can be used to pay for design costs, materials, labor, and permit fees for new construction or renovations to existing affordable housing, for property and building assessments, and to purchase existing housing or vacant land for future development of affordable housing. Only nonprofit organizations are eligible for the grant. Partnerships with private developers can only be considered if the affordable units are or will be owned by the nonprofit. For this year's grants, we will be prioritizing deeply affordable housing that will start development within the next year. Under the administrative order, deeply affordable means dwelling units that will be rented at least 40% below market rents in the area where the housing is located. Beyond these two factors, how we will prioritize applications is further described in the administrative order. Priorities include projects that exceed energy efficiency and accessibility standards under the building code, projects put forward by nonprofits that already provide deeply affordable housing, projects that are eligible for or have received funding from CMHC or Housing Nova Scotia, projects from applicants that show financial and administrative stability and the viability of the project, projects that will provide repairs to existing housing that are required for compliance with minimum occupancy standards, and projects that are required to pay cash in lieu under the Regional Center's Density Bonus Program. This year's applications are web-based, and there is a separate form for each type of application. The 4 kinds of applications are constructing new housing, renovating or rehabilitating existing housing that is or will be affordable, funding for building or property assessments, and purchasing existing housing that will be affordable or purchasing vacant land that will be used for affordable housing in the future. The main sections of the application form are likely what you would expect. We would like to have contact information, a description of the property, details on the proposed project, including proposed affordability, information on other sources of funding you are expecting or have applied for, information on energy efficiency and accessibility, and details about your organization. Some of the key points we'd like to call your attention to are the affordability standard. We recognize that your affordability standard might change, but we want to know what your target range is and how you think you're going to get there. We expect transparency about how firm you are about your affordability standard. This will be included in the contribution agreement and cannot change after the agreement is signed. We would also strongly prefer that the affordability standard be expressed in a dollar value, as well as a percentage of either average income or average market rent. If you are using average market rent, please also clarify whether your reference is to all housing or only new housing. Changes to the affordability standard after your project is approved, but before the contribution agreement is signed, could be possible, but will cause delays. There are different document lists for each form, so please look carefully at these and follow up with the grant team if you need clarification. A pro forma is required for projects that include construction. There is information at the bottom of the application forms about how we'll be sharing information. We will be sharing information internally and externally, both during the application review and throughout the funding period. Successful applicants will have to sign a contribution agreement with HRM, which will include reporting requirements and adherence to an affordability standard. Feel free to add any other information that you think would be helpful for the review team. You can send attachments by email to affordablehousingprogram@halifax.ca. In terms of next steps, December 1st is the deadline for applications. In December, we will do a preliminary review of the applications and send out an acknowledgement email with any initial questions. We will start reviewing the applications in January of 2023. The review team is not finalized, but we will likely include external reviewers such as Housing Nova Scotia, CMHC, and the United Way, and internal HRM reviewers such as development approvals and energy efficiency and accessibility professionals. During the winter of 2023, we hope to select successful applicants and present a recommendation report to Council. And in the spring of 2023, we hope to start writing and signing contribution agreements with the successful applicants. If you are interested in learning more about other affordable housing initiatives we are working on, go to the affordable housing page on halifax.ca. Some key initiatives include waiving municipal permit fees relating to the construction of nonprofit affordable housing, property tax relief for nonprofit housing, and a new category of surplus land suitable for affordable housing that allows nonprofits to purchase land owned by the municipality at less than market value. So just a reminder, to ask a question, click on the purple Ask a Question button and a text box will appear. If you would like your name to be on the public record, post your first and last name with your question. If you don't want your name on the public record, you can post anonymously or provide a nickname or just your first name. So we have some time for questions. Are there any questions that came forward in the chat?
Hi, Jamie Ellen. Yeah, so we have one question. I'll publish it now. So the question is, when you say new projects will be prioritized, does that include projects that have started but not yet completed?
Yeah, so I mean, there's always a risk if you're starting a project before you get the funding. You may get partial funding, or the funding may come late and you will need to pay for some of the expenses yourself. But as long as the project is ongoing and the work has taken place at least during the intake period, then we could consider work that's already underway.
Thanks for that. That's the only question so far. So again, just a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please go to the Q&A function and post your question there, and we'll do our best to answer it here live. Okay, so we have some more questions, Jamie Ellen. I'll publish the first one here. So are co-op projects in priority? Are they included in the priority list? Is the first question.
So co-ops would not be a priority project unless they had another priority factor. So for example, the cooperative housing project that we worked with in 2021, the Compass Nova Scotia project, also received funding from CMHC. So it wasn't that they were a co-op that gave them a priority position. It was because they had funding from CMHC and were eligible for funding through that other program.
Okay, thank you. The next question. So I'm just going to list a couple of things, and they're wondering if any of these expenses would not be eligible for funding. So the list that this person has included is community consultations, not-for-profit soft costs, I think is what that is, and development of an endowment campaign. That list of things, do you see them as being eligible for funding or not?
Okay, so the list of eligible costs and ineligible costs can be found in the administrative order, and I pulled it up on the screen. Brandon, can you see the administrative order? Yep.
I can see that.
Okay, so there's a link to this administrative order off the grant webpage as well, or also I can send it directly if you want to drop me an email. But generally, we want to see eligible expenses being construction costs and design costs. So in terms of operating costs for a nonprofit, those would not be eligible expenses. Also, so private sector construction of affordable housing, unless it meets the criteria of being transferred to the nonprofit before occupancy. So either new construction or rehabilitation would not be eligible if it was developed by a for-profit company or a private sector construction company. An operating expense of the nonprofit, including wages of the employees of the nonprofit, debt payment, or losses from a previous year would not be eligible. So if you're not clear about whether the costs are specifically addressed in the administrative order, maybe have a conversation with somebody from the grant team because we can walk you through it, but we would really like to see most of the grant funding being used for construction costs and design costs.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Jamie, and I would add for that specific person, they posted anonymously, but send us an email and we can look a bit further into that. And any answers that we come up with after the session, we'll include in our Q&A on the Affordable Housing Grant webpage. So please follow up with us if you didn't quite get any of your questions fully answered, or ask again in the chat now would be fine. The next question, can the team share the address or photos of the projects that have completed using this fund?
So I don't think there's any projects that have completed. The Compass project is underway, and also the Welcome Housing and the Affirmative Ventures projects are still underway as well. So we, just being this is the first year of the program, we haven't funded any projects that have been completed. So it kind of brings up an interesting question though about when in the planning process for your project that you should apply for the grant. You should probably make it clear where you are in your funding and where you are in your development process in your application, because if you're really early in the development process, it might make more sense to apply for next year's grant, keeping in mind that this is an annual grant program. So we did run into some, not some issues, but we did raise some questions this year about whether we had funded some of these projects too early, because some of them don't have all of their funding in place. So they've been awarded the Halifax grant, but they're still waiting to get the remainder of their funding in place. So they're not under construction yet.
And the only other question so far, again, from Katie, was about co-ops being given priority, and I think we've answered that one. So it's just, I think it was nice to see in the list of projects funded last year was a co-op project that you mentioned already, Compass, that Compass is developing.
So I'm just going to scroll down to the list of priorities. So again, this is in the administrative order. It's section 25. So there's a pretty comprehensive list of projects that would receive priority. It doesn't mean that if your project isn't on this list that it wouldn't be funded. It just means that these projects are probably easier to approve.
So the next question, Jamie Ellen, is there a maximum funding amount that can be requested in an application?
So if the project is located outside the regional center, then the total available for all projects would be $200,000. So that would be a maximum. In terms of projects inside the regional center, we did not establish a maximum this year for the amount of funding. So it's really just going to be based on the strength of the applications that we receive and the amount of money that's in the density bonus reserve, because there's money being added to that reserve all the time when development in the regional center is happening. So we'll go through the projects and what the requests for funding are, make a recommendation to regional council, and they'll make a final decision about how much money they're going to pull out of the reserve and allocate to this year's grant. So if the project is inside the regional center, then no, there's no maximum, but it will be limited by the amount of funds in the reserve.
Okay, thank you for that. Katie again asks if we can provide a link to the admin order. So I'm just doing that now in the chat. Katie, you can.
Super.
I think I published that. Let me make sure I did. Yeah, I think I published the other questions, which is fine. But so one of the next questions, Jamie Ellen, is can funds be used for professional fees such as a lawyer if it's in regards to the construction?
As long as it's not an operating expense for the nonprofit, then I think that would be an eligible expense.
And again, we can dig a bit further into that one too and add it to our Q&A on the website if we need to.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we wouldn't be expecting that to be considered a construction cost, that it would just be, lumber and nails. It would have to be development professionals that are working on the project as well. So I would expect a lawyer to be included in that as long as it wasn't somebody that was employed by the nonprofit organization.
Okay, so another comment, a bit of a question. It would be great to see drawings of the projects that were awarded the grant. So are these available online?
That's a good question. I don't believe I've seen drawings of the Affirmative Ventures project. I'm sure there would be drawings somewhere of the Compass project. If you want to send me an email at the Affordable Housing Program website, email address, I can see if I can find some pictures and send them over to you.
Okay, so our next question comes from Arthur, and he asks, what does support for building assessments mean?
So, for example, some of the projects that we're working with for the RHI program, well, I guess at least one project, they purchased an existing building, and what they did was they employed someone to do a property assessment of the building before they purchased it to understand, what the deficiencies are, if there are any deficiencies, how much, like, it basically is to try and understand how much it would cost to redevelop the project or the property. And that wasn't previously an expense that was eligible under the grant program, so we added that last year. But basically it's to assess existing properties to try to get a better understanding of what the development costs would be and help in project planning.
Thanks for that. Don't have any further questions this time. One of the things that I think we've been asked a couple times is there any advantage in groups sending in their applications before the deadline, Jamie Allen?
So we're not going to be reviewing or evaluating the applications before the deadline. However, we will look at them before the deadline. So if you have any questions about the information that you have available, are we going to need more information, or if we have outstanding questions that we would like you to answer before we can consider the application, then you can absolutely do that before the deadline, and we can work with you to get your application kind of where we want it to be by the deadline if you're at all insecure about that. And that goes as well if you don't have an actual application to bring forward. We'd be happy to meet with anybody to go over your project individually, or we could set up another Teams meeting if there are a number of projects that are kind of similar that we could go through. But anybody from the grant team is more than happy to walk you through the application process, the documents that you need, and whether your project would be eligible.
Okay. We have another question here. How many applications do we typically receive?
We just received 3 last year, so we're hoping to receive more this year.
Okay, so another question just from some of the questions we've come up with before the meeting. What happens if a grant is awarded and paid, but the development isn't ultimately completed?
So all of the successful applicants would be required to sign a contribution agreement with HRM before they would receive any money. So there'd be conditions in the contribution agreement that basically define under what conditions people would have to repay the money. So basically that's what it would be. If the money has already flowed, the money would need to be repaid to HRM if the project doesn't go forward. Or for example, if the building is built and we funded it and the intention was for it to be affordable housing, but then maybe it's sold for market housing, then the grant money would also need to be paid back. And what we're looking for is there'll be a time period in the contribution agreement as well. So the affordability standard would be tied to the development for that time period in the contribution agreement. And if that is if it's not held over the time period in the agreement, then also probably a portion of the money would need to be paid back, not the full amount.
So I'm just, I think, thanks for that. We've got a couple more questions here. I think Arthur's audio might have cut out when we were answering his questions. So if we could just go over quickly again, what does funding for building assessments mean?
So basically that's just assessing an existing building that could be purchased or converted to affordable housing and trying to, so the purpose of the building assessment would be to help plan if there needs to be renovations or rehabilitation of the building, how much those would cost, and trying to understand if there's any deficiencies in the building that would need to be addressed before it can be converted. So the two second pieces here, support for building assessments and acquiring buildings, housing units, or properties for affordable housing. You would expect a building assessment to come before acquiring a building. In some cases, it wouldn't always be required. So in many cases, the state of a building is well known, so you wouldn't necessarily need to pay money to have a building assessment done. But if there's any unknowns, then a building assessment can be helpful in understanding whether it's a good deal and whether the project is viable.
Thanks for that. And I think the good example you gave last time was the Rapid Housing Initiative project that's being developed by Housing Nova Scotia, the Housing Trust, right? Yeah. Okay, so the next question, are the applicants usually large enterprises?
Well, I guess it would depend on what you mean by large, but the 3 projects that we had last year were a pretty good variety. So the Compass project, Compass is a pretty big development company, or I would consider them a pretty well-experienced company. Welcome Housing is working with an established housing program in HRM, the YWCA SHIM program for young mothers. So that's a well-established program, but I wouldn't call them a big program. The development was only for renovation for 4 existing dwelling units. And then the Affirmative Ventures project, it's been ongoing for quite some time, but they have 1 building that they operate now, kind of similar to what their proposed project is going to be, but I wouldn't consider them to be a big nonprofit. There are only a handful of people working on the project.
Okay, and just to correct myself in the last one, I said that the project is being completed by the Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia, the Rapid Housing project that you referenced. So the next question, is there a timeline for completion?
So we're going to be prioritizing projects that could be complete within the next year. However, aside from that, there isn't a firm deadline for when the projects have to be completed. However, as I said before, if the project is really in its early development stages, it might be advantageous to wait until future years to apply for the grant. One of the issues that we've been running into this year is because we can prioritize projects if they receive funding from CMHC, it's hard to really know where in the funding application process you would apply for this grant. So what ended up happening was we had a grant application last year that was approved. We had affordability standard in the application that looked really great. And then once that proponent started going through their process with CMHC, we had terrible inflation this year. Their construction costs went up. So they ended up needing to have a higher proportion of their funding come from mortgage from CMHC as opposed to a grant. So that meant that they needed to decrease their affordability standard. So it meant that because they didn't have that CMHC funding kind of worked out before they applied for our grant, we had to go back and change the affordability standard, and it added time to the process because we needed to get approval for the project with the new affordability standard. However, at the same time, it did help with that project's application to CMHC to have the HRM grant already in place because it helped show the viability of their project. So while there's no firm deadline, we would like projects to be ongoing, underway, at least have some kind of movement. So if you have some design plans, you have some funding in place, something more than a good idea before you come for our grant. But at the same time, it doesn't need to be shovel ready. We understand that it can take some time to apply for grants. In lots of cases, especially for smaller projects, you might need several different layers of grants, different grants from different organizations, and that takes some time to put together. So we're not going to be pulling back the grant money if projects aren't moving ahead unless they really stall.
Okay, thank you. So this question's a bit tied to the affordability standard, and it's tough, but what's an example of an affordable rent for a two-bedroom as an example? Do we have a minimum affordability standard?
We don't have a minimum affordability standard. We have the standard for what is considered deeply affordable will be 40% less than market rent for a unit of the similar type, so 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, etc. But the definition of affordable housing in the administrative order, and I'll just scroll up to it, comes from the charter. So it means housing that meets the needs of a variety of households in the low to moderate income range. So for example, the Compass project was moderately affordable. The rents they're being charged are going to be 80% of market rent. So that's not deeply affordable, but the Welcome Housing project is deeply affordable. So we'd like to fund a range of affordabilities. It's not really set in stone what the affordability standard needs to be, but we do want to make sure that we understand how you're coming up with your affordability numbers, because like I said, last year we ran into the problem of the numbers changing over time when we were negotiating the contribution agreement, which added some complexity to that process. But if your affordability numbers need to change, that's not the end of the world, but we just need you to be transparent about where those numbers are coming from. Is this just a best wish that you would like to have the affordability pegged to what you're presenting in your application, or do you have some firm construction costs, funding estimates, some firm reasons why you're presenting the numbers that you're presenting?
And so that example of a two-bedroom rent would be totally dependent on the market, the area that the project's located, correct?
So it doesn't have to be dependent on the market, because we can accept affordability standards that are pegged to either market rent or median income. So I'm trying to think of how. So the Compass project, the affordability standard was pegged to market rent, but I believe the affirmative ventures project is pegged to the area median income. So there's kind of two different ways to look at the affordability standard.
Okay. Thanks for that. The next one's a bit of a technical question with the application process. It's our first year using this new online submission form, correct? So the question is, when completing the application online, can it be saved and closed to finish at another time, or does it need to be completed all at once? And that might be a question that we need Deanna's help with, or to follow up with later, because it is our first time using this application program or form online.
Right. I
Yeah.
would say it will need to be completed all at once. I don't believe it's not built in to have a saving option. Sorry.
Thanks for that, Deanna, and it's a good bit of feedback. If we can, maybe we'll explore that for future years if we could include that, because I know it is a bit of work to complete the application. So the next question, is it possible for a developer to work with a nonprofit to use their contribution to the density bonusing program to provide affordable housing on site?
Yep. So I can just scroll down to the timeline for that. Trying to remember. Here we go. So at the contribution agreement stage, we would want to see an agreement between the private developer and the nonprofit. So there needs to be an agreement between the nonprofit and the person under which the person agrees to transfer ownership of the affordable housing dwelling units that are the subject of the grant to the nonprofit organization prior to occupancy. So the nonprofit does need to own the units. So for example, if it's a condominium building and they don't need to own the whole building, they could just own the units that they're being that the grant is being applied for. But a private company itself is not eligible for the grant. So at some point in the process, and definitely prior to occupancy, the nonprofit organization needs to own the housing.
Okay. Next question, when applying for renovations, does it have to be for one building or could it be for multiple?
Definitely could be for multiple.
Okay, and could it be for multiple types of renovations within that same application?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, we would want a lot of specific information on each of the buildings and each of the types of renovations. So the application form itself might get a little complex, but I don't mind going through the information that's attached to one application. We don't need you to chop up your application into a bunch of different separate forms. And the same goes for maybe if there's a couple of different steps to your project that you're still anticipating would be complete within the same kind of project time frame. So maybe you're going to purchase property and then build the units. Like, you don't need to submit a different form as long as you make sure that you include all the information that's required for each of the different forms with whichever form you're choosing to submit.
And that does remind me of the renovation application we did have and did fund with the grant. They had multiple pieces to their renovation. There were a few different elements. So yeah, it's great to know. Couple just comments. Someone thanking you for the presentation and the chance to ask questions. Excited to see the projects that come out of it. And based on some of the feedback today, we'll try and post some more information about those completed projects on the website if we can. Being cognizant of the sensitivity of some of the locations and stuff like that, we'll look into what we can share with members of the public. And then just another comment that 20% below current market is not affordable for low to medium incomes. So that's noted, and we appreciate that. And so that's why we look to a range of affordability and try to, this year, like Jamie Ellen mentioned, we're prioritizing those deeply affordable projects. No new questions at the moment, but this has been great. There's been lots of questions coming in, so hopefully there's a few more out there. Are there any, Jamila, any other common, oh, the link, sorry, Katie, I just see a comment from Katie. I think I did post in the Q&A chat the link to the admin order at 12:19 p.m. If you don't see it, let me know again. Yeah, I see it, but I'll post it again just in case. Be there now. Any other common questions you get, Jamie Ellen, from groups? That's a tough a big question. But
Let's have a look here.
While you're looking, if you see anything you want to answer, another comment, just remember watching the meeting that they're looking forward to seeing the new projects in our city that are affordable. So just thank you, and thank you all the groups who are doing all of this important work. Okay, so another question here from Arthur. Are energy efficiency upgrades to existing co-op owned buildings beyond the scope of Efficiency Nova Scotia grants eligible?
Yes, absolutely. So energy efficiency is one of the priority criteria under the administrative order, so that would be a great project to put forward.
And the application deadline again is December 1st, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Scroll back up to the timeline.
Thank you. So I'm not seeing any more questions. I guess that kind of, I don't know if we want to wrap up, but we'll hang out here for the rest of the scheduled session in case there are more questions that come up, but I'm not seeing
Sure.
any questions bubbling up as quickly as they were before, so.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks to all the people who attended, and Jamie Ellen, if you want to go to your contact information slide
Oh,
again,
yeah.
it might be helpful before they jump out of the
Yes.
meeting.
Super.
Okay, so the email address, if they have any questions, what is that again? Just leave it
Affordable housing program at halifax.ca.
Thank you. Okay, so another question we have, would this be affected by other funding received from a provincial or federal program? How would that impact their application?
So if projects are also eligible for funding from CMHC and Housing Nova Scotia, then that would make them a priority for funding under this program. Sometimes what we like to do is piggyback on those other programs in terms of reporting requirements and tying the timeline to what they're asking for. So it just makes the administrative piece on our end a little bit easier. But it doesn't affect it in the sense that it's going to you're going to get more or less money, but it still depends on the budget that you're presenting. And obviously, we're only going to fund money fund parts of the project that you need money for. We're not going to fund beyond the cost of the project. But other than that, our program is designed and intended to work well with those other programs. So it wouldn't be a negative for sure. And in some cases, it would be a positive.
Okay, thank you. So the next question I see is, were any of the projects that received this funding located on the Halifax Peninsula?
Yep, 2 of the 3 projects that we funded last year were located in the regional center. So 2 of them are on the peninsula. Neither one of them is in Dartmouth. And the 3rd project was on Main Street in Dartmouth, just outside the circumferential highway. So it is not in the regional center. So that's where, so that kind of shows the 2 buckets of funding that we have for the program. The 2 projects in the regional center were funded through the density bonus reserve, and then the project outside the regional center was funded through that money from the planning and development operating budget.
Okay, so we've gone through about 30 questions. I'll kind of make a last call for questions, and then if we don't get anything, we'll kind of wrap it up by 12:45. And like I said, any questions we receive and provide more detailed answers to, and we'll try and add them to our Q&A, our FAQ on the Affordable Housing Grant webpage, if possible. So we'll just put a last call for questions if anybody has any final questions. And if you want to speak a bit in more detail, you could send an email to the address or call Jamie Ellen. Her number's there listed on the screen. It's 902-476-8361, or email affordablehousingprogram@halifax.ca. Okay, one question came in there. Are there some keyword eligibility certification for eligible energy efficiency consultants?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Yeah, so I think the question might be about energy efficiency consultants. So is there any kind of key eligibility certifications we're looking to see in terms of energy efficiency programs or consultants?
No, I don't think so. So as long as the units are going to be affordable, any kind of upgrade would be eligible for funding. So if that is an upgrade that would improve energy efficiency, then that's fantastic. That would trigger a priority under the administrative order. But all that we need to see is that the energy efficiency would be beyond what will be required by the building code. And what we did last year was we had building officials, HRM building officials, look at the energy efficiency proposal and make a determination about whether or not that threshold was met. So we don't need project proponents to spend a bunch of money on an energy efficiency professional to kind of prove one way or the other, like specifically what the energy efficiency would be. We had some of the applicants do that last year, and with a great deal of detail, which was great to see. However, we don't need that much detail. We just need to know that it's going to meet that threshold of being beyond what's required by the building code. And also that is just to establish a priority. So the renovation would still be eligible as long as the housing is affordable, but it would push it into a priority category if the energy efficiency is beyond what will be required by the building code.
That's a good point. It's a panel of internal staff with expertise in these different areas that review all these applications and put a recommendation forward. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any new questions. If you want to, I think we can close the Q&A, Jamie, on, and I'll let you wrap it up.
Okay, super.
Thank you all for attending, and Deanna, I think that means we can switch off. And just a reminder that a recording of this session will be posted to the Affordable Housing Grant webpage.
Thanks everyone, and thanks Brandon and Deanna.
Thank you.